Okay, so I think we've hit 25.2, so I'm going to take that as an opportunity to get started. So firstly, thank you out to everyone that's joined the webinar so far. It's so nice to see so many of you joining me on a Thursday to talk about what is something that is very exciting, which is starting out on your journey towards SFP, and it's my absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you about this. So just before we get going, I just want to give a quick shout out to the Bite Medicine webinar platform. So I'm sure you'll be familiar with the fact that it includes a Q&A, question and answer bank, and also an online textbook. And as someone who's recently graduated from medical school themselves and has used Bite Medicine in medical school, I can really vouch for the quality of the resources that Bite Medicine offer. So definitely go and check it out through the link that's in the top right hand of the screen right now. So because I'm new to presenting for Bite Medicine, I thought I'd take a little opportunity before we get going properly to introduce myself. So hello, my name is Shivani. I am a graduate of the University of Birmingham Medical School. I graduated earlier this year in July, and I am a current SFP doctor in the West Midlands in medical education. When I applied to the SFP last year, I applied in 2 deaneries. So I applied in West Midlands and London. I was interviewed in both, and I ranked 5th in my deanery in the West Midlands. In terms of kind of my interests, both academically and clinically now, I'm looking towards a kind of medical career in respiratory medicine or acute medicine. And I have roles currently in both, obviously, clinical medicine, research and teaching. So it's my absolute pleasure to be able to talk to you today about the SFP. And I've just put my contact details on the bottom of this slide. So please do make a note of them. I'm always very happy to answer questions. So feel free to get in touch. So I just want to spend a little moment talking about our plan for both the series and today's session. So hopefully you'll have seen a lot of promotion on social media about the series. It's going to be 7 sessions that I'm going to be delivering. The last session is a Q&A with some SFP trainees in lots of different deaneries. And the idea is essentially to kind of guide you through the key steps of applying to an SFP post based on my recent experience having applied in 2 deaneries just this past year. So you can see the schedule and the full dates are all available through the Bite Medicine social media. So do check it out. And obviously we're on the first session today. So in terms of today's session, essentially we're going to be starting right at the beginning. So we're going to be talking about what academic medicine actually is, what the SFP is, and a bit about the academic training pathway, the advantages and disadvantages of doing an SFP post, and also thinking a bit about, having made your decision to apply, what sorts of things do you need to be thinking about over the coming year. And I hope that this session will last at around an hour. We are going to be using Mentimeter during the session to kind of get a bit interactive. So please have your mobile phones to hand just so you can participate in the session. So let's first of all start with a bit of an icebreaker, because I'd like to kind of find out a bit more about all of you and where you're at in terms of deciding on whether or not to apply for an SFP. So if you guys go to menti.com, I'm going to show you in a minute the code to get onto the page. And essentially we're going to start off with this first question. So this is just a bit about what stage you are in medical school. So if you go to menti.com and use the code at the top, hopefully you will be able to answer this first question. I can get a bit of an idea of who's in our audience tonight. It says quiz not open for some reason. Let me see if I can. That's not that one. I'm not sure about that. Zach, I don't suppose you have any ideas about opening the quiz at all?
Anything Mentimeter associated, I'd be the worst to ask. Let me get one of the other guys to jump on potentially.
All right. Sorry, guys. Bear with us just one moment. We'll see if we can figure this out.
Is this a problem with opening up the quiz?
It looks like it says the quiz isn't open for some reason.
Right. Okay. Is this through, did you create this quiz through your own account?
No, through the Bite Medicine account.
Yes.
Let's see if I can get it open. Okay, is anyone still able to, is the quiz open at all? So it looks like the quiz is working through the online website. So I have actually got the website page open. I don't. Okay, never mind. What I will do, just while we see if we can work out what's going on there, is read the results out loud to you. So in terms of the answer to the first question, 69% of you are final years, 25% of you are fourth years, and 6% are intercalators. So it seems like the majority of our audience at the moment are kind of people who are imminently kind of looking to apply to the SFP. So the next question is about knowing a lot about academic medicine and kind of what a career in academic medicine involves. So again, if you look at the Menti quiz, you should hopefully be able to answer this and tell me a bit about what you know about academic medicine. Okay, so we've got votes coming through. So it looks like most of you kind of are in agreement with this statement or are neutral about it. We've got about 28% of people who are still a bit kind of in the learning process about what academic medicine is. Don't worry, you're in the absolute right place to be able to find out a bit more information. So we'll definitely be talking about this more in today's session. So the next question is, I'm certain that I would like to apply for the AFP. So this is for those of you obviously who are thinking about it a bit more. Let me know where you're at in terms of deciding whether or not you want to apply to the programme. Okay, good. So it looks like the majority of you, so 28% strongly agree and 44% agree that you are looking to apply to the SFP, which is really great news. There are a few people who are kind of on the fence or currently in disagreement and would like to find out a bit more. Again, we'll be talking about all of the pros and cons, so hopefully I'll be able to give you a bit more information to help you make up your minds. And the fourth question is, I know a lot about the SFP application process. So hopefully as we're coming up to the end of August, some of you might have done some reading about this. Okay, so it looks like we're more neutral on this one. The majority of you are kind of a bit unsure about what the process involves. So we'll be talking about an overview of what you kind of need to do during the process. And obviously this series is going to give you a lot better an idea of what's involved. So again, you're in the absolute right place to find out more information. And finally, I'd like to know a bit about your confidence in putting together a portfolio for your SFP application. So let me know how you feel. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, so it looks like actually, oh, it started working. Lovely. So it looks like the majority of you actually don't feel that confident with putting together a portfolio, which is really useful for me to know. So when we come to it, I'm going to focus a lot on kind of what sort of things to think about in your portfolio, what sorts of things count, and hopefully this will help you kind of build up your confidence in putting together your portfolio. So thank you so much to everyone for participating in that quiz. It's given me a much better idea of where you guys are at, and hopefully in the rest of the session I can tailor what I talk about to address some of the areas that you guys have raised for me. So the first section we're going to look at is kind of talking a bit about academic medicine and what the SFP actually is. So let's start with the very basics. What is academic medicine? Well, I'm sure you'll have seen clinicians about on the wards, and you'll know that the majority of their work is kind of clinical duties. So it's day-to-day care of patients. A lot of clinicians will have roles in leadership and management and teaching as part of their kind of clinical roles. So you might have seen some doctors having roles within their NHS jobs in these sorts of fields, but the emphasis is heavily on patient care. The difference between a clinician and an academic clinician is that with an academic clinician, there's more equal emphasis on a mixture of the clinical and non-clinical roles. So if we take our example academic clinician here, let's think about what sorts of roles she might be involved in. So obviously, as with normal clinicians, academic clinicians are still very heavily involved in day-to-day patient care and organisation of departmental services. So just because you become an academic clinician, it doesn't mean that you lose that clinical side of your role at all. You also might have some roles in research. So typically academic clinicians are the people who kind of oversee research in the department. They design projects based on the needs of the area and the research field at the moment. They may be a supervisor to trainees in academic medicine. And they also look at service improvement as well. And something that's important to highlight is that this isn't just within secondary care. So there's an increasing emphasis on this sort of role within primary care as well. So if you're considering a career in GP, don't feel like academic medicine is therefore not a career for you. A lot of academic clinicians will also have kind of more formal education roles. So the way this tends to work is they might have contracts with a university in a region and then an honorary contract with the NHS. And what this means is that they are very much at the forefront of leading medical student education on behalf of the university. So a lot of your professors at university may well be academic clinicians that have followed this particular route. They may also be involved in kind of writing books and educational literature, and also within your hospitals as well, like with the clinicians that aren't academic, they may be involved in postgraduate education as well. And finally, academic clinicians will also be heavily involved in leadership within the hospital or in the GP practice and kind of governance of services. So now that we've talked about what academic clinicians actually do, let's think about what the SFP is a bit more. So the SFP stands for the Specialised Foundation Programme, and it was previously known as the Academic Foundation Programme, but they've changed the name to kind of encompass the fact that it's not just about research, it's about lots of different areas within medicine. So the SFP is a 2-year programme for doctors who've just completed medical school, and it is essentially the equivalent of doing a foundation programme for people who are interested in academic medicine. So if we look at what the normal foundation programme looks like over the course of those 2 years, you'll see that across each year, foundation year 1 and 2, you will have 3 clinical rotations, so a total of 6 rotations. The SFP is slightly different to this. So the most typical format of the SFP is that in your foundation year 1, you will be entirely clinical, but in your second year, rather than having 3 clinical rotations, you will often have one academic rotation. And we'll talk about what that academic rotation might involve in a second. In some deaneries, you might get a bit more of an unusual structure. So some deaneries include an academic rotation in the first year as well, so that you end up with only 4 clinical rotations. And some deaneries offer programs where you have academic time allocated every week throughout the program. But it's worth noting that these programs are quite rare, and the most common format for the SFP is this top one, where you've got just the one clinical block, which is 4 months long. So let's now think a bit about what you could potentially do in that academic block. So as I say, the SFP isn't just about getting you involved in research. And so to reflect this, there are 3 kind of main themes of posts that are currently available as part of the SFP. So obviously the first one is the research SFP. So this is essentially where you're allocated to a research department. And the idea is that you'll be supported in designing your own project in a specialty of your interest. And often you'll be able to kind of contribute to whatever's going on in the department at the time. The main sorts of benefits of doing this program are for those people who are looking to gain more research skills and research experience. So often the output of this SFP would be publications and presentations and opportunities to learn more research skills. Then you have the education SFP. So this is the one that I'm currently doing at the moment. And as part of this program, for that 4-month block, you are essentially attached to the medical education department at your hospital, and you will essentially work as a teaching fellow for your medical school for that 4-month block. Some programs offer you an opportunity to complete a postgraduate certification, so a qualification in medical education like my one. And obviously, just because you're in this education role, it doesn't preclude you from doing a bit of research as well. So there are also opportunities for you to write medical research and publish papers through this course as well. And finally, there's the leadership SFP. So this is probably kind of the rarest SFP that's available, but the aim of this program is to kind of promote clinical leadership and equip the trainees with the skills they need to be an effective clinical leader. So over the course of the 4-month program, you would be supported to kind of design a local program to improve patient care in the area. You will often receive training in leadership methods, and you may even be involved in leading projects involving your fellow trainees. And obviously there's opportunities to attend conferences through this as well. So now that we've talked a bit about the SFP specifically, let's now consider the integrated academic training pathway, of which the SFP is kind of the first block. So as I say, the SFP is the origin of this pathway, and it's essentially designed to be a 2-year taster in academic medicine. So it's designed to give you a bit of an idea about whether or not academic medicine is likely to be something that you want to do going forward long term. And so it's very much a taster. It's the same length of time as the foundation program. Once you've done the SFP, you kind of have 2 options depending on the specialty that you're interested in. You could either apply for an ACF, so an academic clinical fellowship program, straight out of the foundation program, in which case you would be an ST1 at the time of applying. Or you could do a core training program and then apply to the academic clinical fellowship as an ST3 trainee, so a couple of years in. And the option of whether or not to do each of those is dependent on the specialty and how training in that specialty works. So what does an ACF actually involve? So like with the foundation program, the idea of the ACF is to support your academic and clinical development. And so you would be 75% clinical and 25% academic. And the organization of that time very much depends on the deanery. So it could well be that you're allocated time every week to work on something, or it could be all grouped together in one block. And typically the program lasts for about 3 years. And at the aim of it, it's hoped that you would go on to pursue an out of program training fellowship. So let's talk a bit more about the fellowship now. So essentially, as I say, the fellowship is an opportunity for you to step out of the clinical training pathway and be essentially almost full-time research working on obtaining a PhD or an MD. And typically they offer you funding to be able to do this for 3 years, but obviously sometimes it can take longer, depending on personal circumstances and what you're working on as well. So once you've kind of gone on to obtain your PhD or MD, you can step back into the pathway on what's called a clinical lectureship. So essentially, this is where you are 50-50 clinical and academic. And the idea is that you continue both your academic and clinical roles until you complete your clinical training. And at that point, you are effectively an academic consultant. And there are lots of different roles that you can pursue as an academic consultant, which are listed on the far right of this diagram. And that is very much dependent on your specialty and your deanery and what your interests are. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a better idea of what academic training looks like, and sort of the time frame of it. What I will say at this point is that this diagram and this understanding of the academic training pathway is really, really important when you're applying for the SFP, because a lot of the academic recruitment process depends on you having a good understanding of what this process looks like. So definitely go away and read about it in your own time. The National Institute of Health and Care research are really good, and they provide lots of information about the specifics of this training pathway. So definitely go away and look into it after this session. So let's now think about what the advantages and disadvantages of doing academic medicine and an SFP are, because naturally, as with any program, there are going to be benefits and disadvantages. So let's start with the positives. So firstly, I think a really good advantage of the SFP is that you can have an opportunity to gain a lot of non-clinical skills, particularly as a lot of these programs offer you additional teaching that you wouldn't otherwise get during the foundation program. And also having the protected time gives you the time to actually work on developing and applying those skills as well. As I say, some of the programs offer an opportunity for you to achieve additional qualifications. So say, for example, my program in education will enable me to achieve a PG cert. And I think it's a really great way to help patients in more ways than just your clinical work, because obviously if you go forward and you train the next generation of doctors, or you produce a really impactful piece of research, that's going to benefit patients globally, not just within your local practice. It also enables you to kind of look into areas of medicine that you find interesting and kind of explore the boundaries of modern medicine. And it's a really exciting time to be involved in research at the moment, particularly with the advancements in kind of molecular technology and telemedicine as well. And obviously having one less clinical rotation means that you can be a bit more flexible with how you plan your time in that rotation in terms of leave to attend conferences and learn new skills. And finally, I think it's really good that you're able to forge networks with other academics in your deanery. And certainly since I've started the academic program in my trust, I've had so many people reach out to me with opportunities and willing to get me involved in academic projects. So it really is a good way to open doors. So obviously there is a downside to everything. So let's now think about some of the disadvantages of doing an SFP. Obviously, it's competitive because they offer very good training opportunities, so you do need to be prepared for stiff competition. You do get one less clinical rotation, and that has a knock-on impact on your ability to develop skills and also work on your clinical portfolio. So going into the SFP, you do need to kind of be prepared for the fact that you'll have to work hard to make sure you achieve all of your clinical competencies within the 5 rotations rather than 6. So yeah, that carries on from the idea that you get one less clinical rotation. You are slightly more restricted in the clinical jobs that you have available because obviously there aren't that many academic programs available, and so you tend to kind of have to sacrifice either choosing an academic rotation or getting all of the clinical jobs that you want. So it's a compromise that you need to be willing to make. And you need to be aware of the fact that during the academic rotation, you may well be paid less due to doing less out of hours work. So it will have an impact on your pay during that rotation. Obviously, there are ways to kind of compensate for that through locum work, but it is something to bear in mind as well. So that kind of brings us to the end of the first section. So what I'd like to do at this point in time is just pause and answer any questions you guys have about kind of that section. So please feel free to message in the Q&A. I'm just going to pause here to give you guys an opportunity to type in any questions about that first section. So I can see a question that says, how did you choose which 2 deaneries you applied to? So I think with this, it's important to think about your personal and professional priorities. So think about where in the country you'd like to live, but also think about what skills you'd like to gain, which deaneries can offer you opportunities to gain those skills, and also what specialties and deaneries you're interested in as well. So I've got a couple of questions coming through. So when you say less opportunities for job applications, are you referring to specialty training and above? No, so what I'm referring to is within the academic program itself, obviously there are a restricted number of SFP posts available, and so it means that you have less flexibility in terms of kind of choosing the clinical rotations that you want. It doesn't at all affect your ongoing career prospects at all. In fact, I think doing an SFP really enhances your portfolio going forward. It looks very impressive. So what are the other options available after year 5 other than the SFP? So obviously you can go forward and do the foundation program, and certainly I've had colleagues doing research alongside their clinical work, and that's been perfect for them. But do bear in mind that a lot of that work will end up being in your own time. There's also something new called the Foundation Priority Program, which is designed to kind of promote experience in certain specialties that are high priority. And as part of that, I think you are able to kind of work with academic departments as well. So as a prospective surgeon, what types of SFPs would be best to apply to maximise points for applications later down the line? So I would kind of reframe your thought process there and say, as a prospective surgeon, what sorts of skills are you looking to gain that would help you be a better academic surgeon? And what skills would you like to gain? If you kind of approach the process like that, you can choose an SFP that's personal to you, that will help you address areas that you'd like to work on and help you to be a more well-rounded character. I think with the SFP, there's no right or wrong answer. It's very much kind of personal preference. So can you apply to only one theme of SFP? No, so you can apply to multiple SFP posts in each deanery. Bear in mind, you can only apply to 2 deaneries. So say, for example, I applied to a mixture of medical education and research posts in both of my deaneries, and I prioritized choosing the medical education posts. So is the teaching and leadership SFP also structured as a dedicated block within the 2 years? Yes, it is. So say, for example, with my program, I've got a 4-month block in my F2 year where I will be a pure clinical teaching fellow within my trust. So it's the exact same in that you get the protected research time, the protected academic time, and it's just that that time is devoted to teaching or leadership instead. So how do you find out which deaneries and hospitals offer the SFP? So all of the information is published on the UK FPO website. They very helpfully have a section for the SFP, and they are in the process of uploading all the information there. I believe they've just released information about the deaneries that are offering the SFP this year. So are all 3 themes combined, or are they separate? No, so they are separate posts that you apply to. But as I say, just because you choose to do one theme of SFP, that doesn't mean that you can't get involved in other types of academic work. So say, for example, I'm doing a teaching post, but I've already been offered opportunities in research as well. It just means that your protected time is primarily allocated to doing the theme that you've chosen to apply to. Okay, so how many SFPs can you apply to? So you can apply to 2 deaneries or 2 academic units of application. And within each of those deaneries, you can apply to as many posts as you want to. And finally, can you apply to an SFP? Oh, sorry, I've managed to skip forward a couple. Can you apply to the SFP without knowing which specialty you want to go into the long term? Yes, absolutely. So I think it's very much about exploring your interests and gaining transferable skills. So say, for example, in my case, I'm not entirely certain of which medical specialty I'm going into. And so my SFP is very much an opportunity for me to explore my interest in both and gain transferable teaching skills, which will be useful in whatever specialty I choose. Okay, so that's all of the questions for that section that I can see right now. I will answer some more questions later on, but for now, let's move on to talking about applying to this year's SFP. So let's talk about steps to the SFP. So I've tried to summarize this in 6 key steps for you to think about. The first one is to decide whether or not you want to apply. And I'd really encourage all of you to think strong and hard about this, because applying to an SFP, it is a big commitment, and you need to be sure that it is the right decision for you. And if it isn't the right decision for you, that's also okay. As I say, there are other ways for you to kind of get into academic medicine. And just because you don't do an SFP, it doesn't mean that you can't potentially apply for academic posts later on. The next step is to think about preparing your portfolio and identifying your strengths and weaknesses to work on. And we're going to talk about this in the rest of the session. So I will move on to the next point, which is researching your deaneries. There is a common phrase, which is failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And this really applies to the SFP. So before you apply in September, I would really encourage all of you to very thoroughly research the deaneries and the programs you're looking into. Reach out to SFPs in your posts of interest, look into reviews of the hospitals you're working at, and make sure that you're well informed about the programs that you're applying to. The next step is white space questions, which I'm going to be talking about more next week. So this is a little plug to tune into that session. And then in September, you have to submit your written application, and we'll talk about the deadline for that in the next few slides in a minute. And after that, you will be looking to prepare for interviews. And again, in the later sessions, I'm going to be going through the common interview stations that you'll be experiencing. So let's now look at how the application process pans out and when you should be thinking about certain things. So this is a kind of timeline of this year into next year. And on the top, I've put the common, the main kind of UK FPO milestones from the timeline this year. You'll notice that on the 20th of September, I've highlighted that box in red, because that's a really important deadline that you all need to have written in your calendar. So whereas previously the SFP applications were submitted at a later time point, as of last year, they changed the process so that all SFP foundation program and priority program applications are all due in one application form at the same time, and it's the 20th of September this year. So I would encourage you all to be triple careful about making a note of this deadline, because if you miss it, they will not consider your application, and that's really important to bear in mind. So once you've kind of submitted that application, you have a bit of a break, and then over the course of November to January, you will have your interviews, and then as of the end of January, moving into February, you will have offers coming through in multiple rounds. So in terms of kind of thinking about when you need to think about certain things, so deciding on applying and preparing your portfolio and white space questions are things that you should ideally be doing kind of over the summer holiday, because that means you can kind of think about things carefully before the academic semester kicks in and you get very busy with final year. Then writing your white space questions kind of comes in August to September, and remember these white space questions are due on the 20th of September. And then from there you can start thinking about the next steps, which are essentially submission and interview preparation thereafter. So let's now think about putting together your portfolio for the Academic Foundation Programme. So if we take a look at how research is produced, we can identify multiple key steps. So initially, you might have a research question around which you design a study. And once you've sought approval for that study, you can then go on to conduct it. And once you've done that, you will hopefully have some results which you can take forward to present and maybe even publish in a journal. And depending on the extent of what you find and the impact of it, you may even be able to win some prizes and awards. So if we distill that research journey, this essentially leads to 3 categories of points that are rewarded to reflect your ambition in pursuing that research journey through med school. And these 3 categories are presentations, publications, and prizes and awards. So essentially 3 key outputs from research that you've produced during med school. So we're going to talk about each of these in a bit more detail now. Let's start with presentations. So hopefully you might know that when we think about presentations, there's kind of a hierarchy of presentations that are looked at. So you can start off with local presentations that are things like the Grand Round, regional presentations such as regional research meetings, and then you have your national and international conferences. And these last 2 are the types of presentations that are rewarded in the SFP. So if we think about how you can kind of go about achieving those presentations, if you're about a year off from applications, I'd recommend kind of researching conferences while you're producing your research and kind of getting in your abstracts early to try and make sure that you're attending those conferences. And often as students, I appreciate conferences are expensive, so there may well be grants that your university offers to help support your attendance at conferences. And some conferences also offer grants for students as well. Now thinking about us now, in the month before application, it's important to kind of tie up your attendance at final conferences, or maybe even consider attending some virtual conferences as well. And what I'd encourage you to do is use this time to collate all of the conferences you've attended and keep a copy of your abstract, the poster, and a certificate of your presentation as well, because this will serve as valuable evidence for you having presented, both now for an SFP and also for future job applications as well. Now let's think about publications. So again, with publications, there's a bit of a hierarchy. So you've got your peer-reviewed PubMed ID journals and your non-PubMed ID publications as well. And the PubMed ID publications are the ones that are credited in the SFP application. So if we try and think about this now a year from application, because research takes a long time to finalize, I would recommend that you start to tie off ends with any research projects you have a year off from submitting your application. And that gives you plenty of time to write up, return any edits to the journals that they ask for, and means that you can ensure your publication is published and listed on PubMed in time for your application. When you are a month off from your application and you've got some kind of loose ends, I'd recommend chasing up with journals to try and see if there's any way that they can review your papers, and make a note of all of the papers that you have at the moment on the PubMed website. It's really important that you make a note of the PubMed ID numbers associated with these publications, because they often have a policy of no PubMed ID number, no credit. So it's really important to triple check these to make sure that they are all correct. So Let's now think about prizes and awards. So there are lots of different categories of prizes and awards that are credited. And actually, you might know that they credit both a mixture of academic prizes and other national prizes as well. So if we start by thinking about your academic prizes, what I would say is try your best in exams, but obviously don't worry if you don't get any prizes. It's not the end of the world. You can still achieve an SFP post without having an academic prize. What I would also say is it might be worth checking your grades and your university transcript, because sometimes if you've achieved in the top 10% of a particular subject in an exam, you might be able to get a little letter from your university to state that, and that may well be credited as a form of academic prize for high achievement. At the SFP level, grants are also considered to be an academic prize. So if you have achieved a grant for any research work that you've conducted, list this under the prizes section, because a lot of deaneries will still credit this as a prize in your application. And the important thing is to always have a paper trail. So make sure that you're getting letters and getting certificates to state that you've got this prize and award. In terms of national prizes, it's really important to make sure that they are first place prizes, because unfortunately, it's really harsh, but they don't consider second and third place, unfortunately. And ways to kind of achieve those national prizes are to kind of look into royal colleges that offer essay prizes and submit an application to them, because actually they tend to be quite undersubscribed, and you'd be surprised that you might end up doing very well. So just off the top of my head, I know that the Royal Society of Medicine offer loads and loads of essay prizes that you can submit to. And as I say, they are often not as competitive as you think they are. So it's definitely worth trying to submit applications there. Other national prizes might be poster or presentation prizes from conferences you've attended to. And again, like with the academic prizes, make sure that you've got a paper trail to back it up as well. It's worth mentioning at this point that unfortunately commendations for outstanding contributions to societies or behavioural commendations from medical schools unfortunately don't count. So they are very much focusing on academic prizes and national prizes on this section of your application. So let's now think a bit about kind of researching deaneries. So this is a map of the UK showing the kind of units of application for academic deaneries. And I believe that the UK FPO just released an updated version on the UK FPO website of all of the academic units of application. It's worth bearing in mind that whereas there are 20 foundation schools for the normal programme, there are actually only 15 academic units of application. And that's because certain deaneries, for example, London, tend to combine together for the academic foundation programme, which means that rather than kind of dividing up the area, you apply to the whole area and choose specific programmes within the whole area. So when you're kind of thinking about researching deaneries, these are some important things to consider. So as I touched on earlier, it's important to think about your location and personal priorities, because ultimately you're going to be living in that area for the next 2 years of your life. So you need to make sure that you're going to somewhere that you're happy to live in and that you feel like you'll be well supported and that you'd enjoy living there. Look at the programs on offers. So think about what specialties you're interested in, what skills you'd like to gain based on looking at your portfolio, and see which deaneries offer programs that kind of enable you to develop those sorts of skills. A lot of the academic deaneries are very helpful, and they put together information, guidance, booklets on what their deaneries offer as part of the program. So definitely take a look through those to see whether they offer training in skills that you're looking to develop. Think about the clinical rotations as well, because obviously, although we are primarily applying for the opportunity to do the academic rotation, 5 of your 6 rotations will still be clinical jobs. And ultimately, you are a doctor first. So make sure that the clinical rotations that come with the academic rotation are specialties that you are happy with, that meet your interests, and will enable you to develop good clinical skills as well. Think about the hospitals that the programs are based at as well. So there are advantages and disadvantages to both district general hospitals and tertiary centres. It's very much a matter of personal preference. So think about those. Look at reviews of the hospitals. There are lots of websites that offer reviews of hospitals from junior doctors. And think about the proximity of the hospitals as well, if that's a factor for you in terms of your living situation. I would say as part of this, definitely try and reach out to kind of trainees in your deanery, because obviously they are your eyes on the ground at the moment to give you the best insight into the deaneries and the hospitals at the moment. So yeah, that's that last point. Definitely try and reach out to those SFPs. A really good way to do that is through Twitter and through social media and LinkedIn. So if you're not already, maybe consider setting up an account and reaching out to some people, because there are some very friendly people who are very happy to help people interested find out a bit more about the area. So this kind of brings me on to towards the end of the session. So I'm going to pause here again to take a couple of quick questions. So would a publication and presentation on the same piece of research count as two separate items? Yes, they would. So you could list it as a publication, and then the presentation for the conference, you can list that as a separate thing under the presentation section as well. So we've done that one. If you have work that has been accepted for a conference that is after the 20th of September deadline, could you include this on your application? So unfortunately for conferences, I believe the rule is still that you have to have been to the conference before the 20th of September. However, for publications, last year they did offer a kind of contingency in view of COVID, whereby if you had an article that was kind of in the process of being uploaded to PubMed, you could provide the PubMed ID later on. So it's just worth checking whether that's still the case for this year as well. Okay, so when you're given an offer for an AFP, will they tell you the exact hospitals and rotations you have? So you can think about this before accepting the offer. So yes, so actually you're able to find out this information well before you even apply. So a lot of the deaneries will list all of the posts in the deanery on their website, and they will tell you which hospitals those rotations are located at. So you should be able to access that information beforehand. And obviously when you receive the offer, it will typically say the trust, and some deaneries will offer you will state the hospital again for you as well. So how do I get involved in research as a fourth year? So it's tricky. I think the best ways to probably get involved in research is to look at faculty at your university through the university website who are looking into areas that you're interested in, and send them an email. And I think the key to this is with persistence, because you can email 50 people and only one of them will get back to you. But all it takes is one person who's interested in mentoring you to provide you with an opportunity. And actually right now there's a much better awareness in both the hospitals and in the universities for academic medicine. So maybe even consider looking up faculty or doctors on PubMed to see who's actively currently researching, and just drop them an email to explain that you're somebody looking to get involved in research. Maybe provide a copy of your CV to show what you've achieved so far, and just keep trying until someone is willing to get back to you. Okay, so answered that one. Is there equal emphasis on publications and prices across all the SFPs? So the emphasis on kind of the this scoring sort of section of the SFP very much depends on the deanery. So before applying, what I would recommend is you look through the deanery's recruitment process to see how their specific application process works. So say, for example, in London, for their shortlisting process, they did place a fair amount of emphasis on that initial point stage because they don't use white space questions. Whereas say, for example, in Birmingham, they kind of paid a more mixed attention to your listed achievements and also to your white space questions as well. Okay, so what I will do is I will save the rest of the questions for the end of the session, and we'll move on to a quick quiz just to make sure that we have kind of understood everything that I've talked about today. So if you go back to menti.com, and first of all, I'm going to ask you this very important question, which is, what is the deadline for this year's SFP applications? So hopefully we should be able to do this as a little quiz. So what I will do is start the quiz. Okay. Oh dear. Let's try reload the page now. Wonderful. So that's decided not to work. How about if you just type in the chat what the in the Q&A what you think the deadline is. So if I go back a slide to show you the options. Yeah, so someone's put in the chat the 20th of September. So that is absolutely correct. And as I said, it's really crucial that you get that deadline correct, because after that point, they will not consider your application at all. So definitely set phone reminders, write it down, put a sticky note on your wall. Don't forget that deadline. Lovely. So let's now move on to this question, which is, which of the following publications will earn you points in the SFP application? So we've got a systematic review published in the Journal of X with a PubMed ID number, a qualitative research study published in Student Journal Y, but it doesn't have a PubMed ID, an abstract for a study presented at a conference with a PubMed ID, and a quantitative research study in a journal without a PubMed ID, and finally, a comment on an article that was published in a journal with a PubMed ID. So take a moment to process those. Let's see if Menti will be our friend for this particular slide. So if you go to menti.com and type in the code that we had earlier, hopefully you should be able to access this slide. Okay. Are people able to get onto Menti for this at all? So you were stuck on the previous question, right? So let's try this. Let's give it a go. Can you see the question now? No, it's not. Aha. Right, so we've got options A, B, C, and D. Let's see if this has worked. Okay, I don't think it's worked, unfortunately. I'm sorry about that. If we go back and look at this answer. So essentially the correct answer is this first one, and let's talk about why. So as I said to you before, it's really important that the article is a piece of research that is published in a journal with a PubMed ID. And points that I particularly want to highlight is that abstracts and comments on articles are commonly not considered as appropriate publications for this section. So it really needs to be a research study of some sort, or a literature review or an article of some sort that isn't considered to be a comment or an abstract that is listed in PubMed with a PubMed ID. And that's why C and E are not correct. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's now move on to the third question. I'm not going to bother with Menti this time because clearly it's not going to be our friend this evening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you look at the next question, and I will ask you to write down which answer you think it is in the chat, Q&A chat for me. So this question says, which of the following would earn you points in the SFP? So we're looking at a local audit at a trust grand round, a study that was presented at a regional meeting, a poster presented at an international conference, an oral presentation presented at a national student conference, and a national audit presented at a regional research meeting. So if you put in the chat which one you think it is, let's call them A, B, C, D, and E, going from top to bottom. Type in which one you think is the right answer. Yeah, lovely. So the answer is the third one. And the point I want to highlight here is both that it has to be a national or an international conference, and it also has it's also common that unfortunately deaneries won't consider student conferences in this section of the application. So let's now move on to the last question, which is which of the following prizes would not earn you points in the SFP application? So we're looking for the incorrect answer here. We've got a high achievement award, winning first prize in a conference presentation competition, a first prize in a national essay competition, a commendation for ranking second in a university exam, and a commendation for outstanding contribution to student body. So again, in the chat, if we go A, B, C, D, and E from top to bottom, just type into the Q&A which one you think it is. Yeah, lovely. So we've got the idea of the commendation for outstanding contribution to student body. So actually, I've got a few answers for D, and actually you'd be surprised to hear that this is actually allowed. So essentially, in terms of academic prizes, they don't mind if it's not a first place. So if you've got a high achievement award for something that you've achieved in medical school from an academic perspective, that may well still be considered as long as it's not been awarded to more than the top 10%, I believe. So the incorrect answer here is outstanding contribution to student body. And remember that we're looking for prizes that are kind of for high achievement in medical school, or first prizes in kind of national essay competitions, or conferences or grants or things like that. So these are the references that I've included on the slides for you to go and look at in a bit more detail. And that actually brings us to the end of the content that I wanted to talk to you about today. So thank you so much for attending. If you are able to, I'd be really grateful for your feedback on the session. If you scan this QR code, it will take you to a feedback form. I do apologise for all of the issues with Menti. I hope that hasn't impeded the session too much. And I'm very happy to take more questions now in the Q&A. So while you guys are doing the feedback, I will start to answer the questions we had earlier. So frankly speaking, if I have nothing for my portfolio, would it be worth applying? And this is from somebody in the chat. What I would say is that it's always worth submitting an application and giving it a go. What I will say is that unfortunately, due to the level of competition, it may well be that you don't get past the shortlisting round in deaneries such as London, where the emphasis is heavily on kind of the achievements you already have through the oral system. However, for deaneries that include white space questions, it may well be worth giving it a go, because ultimately to apply to the SFP, they're not expecting people to be academic clinicians already. The whole idea of the program, as I say, is to give people a bit of a taster. So if you kind of sell yourself from that perspective as being someone that's interested and would like to kind of gain more experience, you may well be able to get to the interview stage and talk about it a bit more. So that answers the next question as well. So can you apply for an SFP and an FP at the same time? Yes, you can. So just because you apply to the SFP, it doesn't mean that you are then excluded from the foundation program. All it means is that if you then accept an SFP post, your application is then withdrawn from the foundation program as well. Okay, so next question. This is specifically about London. So for the prizes section, in the London handbook, they state they don't accept merits. Do they mean merits for degree classifications? What have you got in that? So essentially what they mean by, what I would say is the London scoring system is quite pedantic. And so without looking at this year's handbook, I'm not able to confidently answer that question. However, what I will say is that London are particularly helpful in that they have a webinar on behalf of the deanery, where they have the faculty that are in charge of the program, and they are able to provide a bit more clarification on some of the points of applying as part of that. So I'd recommend signing up to attend that webinar, and you can ask them that question there. From my understanding, if you have a high achievement award for your performance in medical school, that does count as a prize. So yeah, definitely run it by them. And then the second part to that question was, in addition, when you say grants for research, do you mean applying to undergraduate fellowships and studentships? Yes, so say for example, I was able to secure some grants for my research work, which was a vacationship for a summer research project that I did as an undergraduate, and that was considered as a prize. So it's things like that. They may well be national grants from the Wellcome Trust, or from intercalation grants that you might have been awarded. So those sorts of things count. It's important to distinguish those from bursaries though. So bursaries don't count. Grants that you've had to apply for count. Okay. So at what stage do we rank SFP jobs in a deanery? Is it after the interview stage? So you can rank your SFP jobs when you submit your application before September. You can change them anytime up until the final deadline for kind of the SFP deaneries. They will say that on their website. What I would say is I would try and rank your jobs, or at least shortlist the jobs that you want to apply for before you submit your application. And that's because we'll talk about this more next week, but it gives you a clear vision for your white space questions, and it shows that you've thought about the programs you're applying for and why. So it just helps to guide your application and give you a bit of a vision from that perspective. So do letters for the editor count as a publication? So this is one that is always very pedantic from year to year. To be honest, it depends on the deanery. So I believe that last year they were counted in some deaneries, but what I would say is check with your specific deanery guidance whether or not they are counted. So we've already answered the less one. So would not having more than one published piece of work likely be damaging to applications? I would say having one piece of published work is a really impressive achievement for an undergraduate as it is. And as I say, the SFP isn't designed to recruit academic clinicians who are already at the level required. It's designed to recruit people who are interested in academic medicine, who have shown they were interested in academic medicine, I think having a piece of published work really does show that. So it's not how much you've done, it's what you've done and the quality of what you've done. So really sell that piece of published work and show off what you've gained from it, really. So is teaching experience equally valued? Teaching experience is very valued for the SFP, particularly if you are going for one of the medical education posts. In fact, on the white space questions, they now specifically include sections to talk about your teaching experience. Do they ask you to submit a medical CV for the SFP? So no, you don't. So the way you kind of provide a list of your achievements is through the ORIOL website. So you are asked to upload all of your evidence in the relevant sections there. And if your poster wins first prize for a presentation, but you are not the presenting author, does this count as a prize? It depends on essentially, let me think about that a second. Yeah, so it depends on the extent of the presentation. If it's a presentation where the poster was simply displayed on a wall and there was no one manning that poster and you contributed to the design of that poster, then you could argue that that is a prize that you are entitled to if you have the evidence to back it up. So say, for example, I had a prize where my colleagues took it to a conference and it was something like that. So it was just displayed on a website and we won a prize for it. So I was able to claim that as a point because I had contributed equally to the development of the poster that was displayed. If it is a presentation where your colleague actually stood there and presented it, then what I would say is you are probably not entitled to that, because therefore the prize accounts for your colleague having stood there and presented it, if that makes sense. What's important with this is to always also have the evidence to back it up. So if you have a certificate to say that you are entitled to the prize, then you are able to claim that because you have the evidence to back it up. So what are the kinds of subcategories for SFPs out there? I heard that there were things available in surgery and GP. Yeah, so there are loads of different subcategories, and especially because SFP has increased so much in popularity, they offer the SFP in all sorts of specialties, particularly in some of the larger deaneries. They have so many options available now. So it's very much a matter of you going to the areas that you're interested in, and they do usually have a comprehensive list of all the programs and specialties they offer the SFP in. So you are able to find the comprehensive list there. Okay. Any idea if data on cutoff points for shortlists are available for different deaneries? So essentially, it very much depends on the transparency of the deanery. So say, for example, London last year were very transparent in their kind of cutoffs in that webinar that I mentioned that they do. Some deaneries are less specific. It very much just depends on the region you apply for. What do you think are the least competitive deaneries for SFP? So there is a website that usually ranks the kind of least competitive deaneries. And I think the UKFPO actually keep data on this themselves. Essentially what it shows is the kind of ratio of people applying to the number of posts available. So deaneries that tend to have more posts available tend to be less competitive. So what I would say is I'd recommend looking for that UKFPO document. You should just be able to find it through a quick Google, and it will give you all of that information to find that information out. Okay, so I believe that is all of the questions that we have at the moment. Again, thank you so much for attending. I'd appreciate if you can fill out the feedback. And obviously, if you do have any further questions, please feel free to contact me. I'm always happy to answer. Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to end the session here, and I hope you have a good rest of your evening.